She doesn't even know why she's drawn to you. She tries to explain it, says it's your confidence, your aura, your presence. But deep down, she doesn't understand it herself. Because it wasn't what you said. It wasn't what you did. It was what you didn't do. It was how you moved differently than every other man she's ever met. It was how you disrupted the pattern she's lived in her whole life. And the most dangerous part, you didn't even try. What you're about to hear will change how women see you forever. And more importantly, it will change how you see yourself. Before we dive in, comment, "I choose silence." Number 1. Disrupt her routine. Her life is patterns. Patterns built from small comforts, familiar responses, and predictable outcomes that make her feel in control, safe, and validated by a world that rewards repetition and punishes uncertainty. And most men step into that routine like it's their role to serve it, to become her next scheduled reassurance, her next soft space, her next fixed point in a world she wants to bend. But what no one tells you is this: when you become a man who disrupts those patterns not with chaos, but with command, not with begging but with purpose, you instantly separate yourself from the blur of forgettable men she mentally files away and never thinks of again. And this isn't about being confusing or toxic or difficult for the sake of being different. It's about breaking the rhythm of her emotional expectations so deeply that she feels something she can't name when she's around you, because when every other man is predictable, emotionally eager, texting too much, explaining themselves constantly, and giving her power by trying to prove their worth, you become the anomaly when you respond only when necessary, when your energy is focused on your direction, not her validation, when you answer questions with layered intent instead of quick comfort, when your life has its own rhythm and she's forced to sync with it or miss the beat entirely. This is what it means to be the man whose presence becomes a disruption to her routine. Not because you bring chaos, but because your stability is on your own terms. You don't explain yourself to gain her favor. You explain yourself only when clarity is more important than her comfort, and that alone rewires her internal response to you. She stops controlling the narrative. She starts observing you more closely, wondering what you'll do next. And it's in that space, between her assumptions and your independence, that her attachment forms, because now she's thinking about you when she doesn't want to, reanalyzing moments that didn't go the way she expected, feeling off balance but strangely safe. And when she's emotionally off balance but doesn't feel threatened, she becomes addicted to the pattern you create, and that pattern is not one she can map. It's not a game. It's not manipulation, it's leadership. And most men are too afraid to lead because they think leadership means being loud, being dominant in an obvious way. But it doesn't. It means you're not afraid of her disappointment. You're not adjusting your schedule to her moods. You're not pausing your mission to chase her attention. You're living with direction so clear that she either gets in line or gets left behind. And when you move like this, when your time becomes more valuable than her opinion, when your energy is protected, not thrown at her like a performance, she begins to shift. You don't chase her, and yet she starts to show up more often. You don't flatter her, yet she begins to seek your validation in subtle ways. And the reason this works is simple. When you disrupt her routine, you awaken something in her that no compliment or gift ever could. And this is where most men fail. They try to win her over by being agreeable, by being present too much, by over-communicating and over-expressing, not realizing that every time they make themselves available at her convenience, they become another reliable piece of the background noise she expects and feels nothing toward. But when you move with deliberate focus, when you disappear not to punish but to prioritize your path, when you show up with presence instead of persistence, you become rare, and what's rare gets remembered. And yes, she might test you, she might accuse you of being distant or uncaring, but this is the part most men fold at. They fall into explaining themselves, trying to ease her discomfort, and in doing so, they throw away all the leverage they built by being different, because the goal is not to be what she understands. The goal is to be what she studies, what she can't quite figure out. And to do that, you need to break the cycle of availability and replace it with value, not by pretending to be busy, but by actually living a life that is so full of direction, ambition, and focus that her inclusion in your life feels like a privilege, not an obligation. And this is the true disruption. Not drama, not detachment, but disciplined purpose that doesn't revolve around her attention. And the more you embody this, the more she starts to recalibrate her own behavior around your presence. She texts more carefully. She waits longer for your responses. She starts to mirror your communication patterns without even realizing it. And her emotions begin to bond not to the idea of who you could be for her, but to the feeling she gets when she doesn't have full access to you. Because humans don't obsess over what they have. They obsess over what they don't understand. And when you become that rare combination of presence and unpredictability, when your calm interrupts her internal monologue, when your values are so solid that her emotional habits can't move you, you stop being the man she dates and start being the man she can't get out of her system. And from that moment on, every time she hears your name or thinks of something you said, she feels a pull, not just to you, but to the feeling of being disrupted, challenged, emotionally unsettled in a way that makes her feel alive. And that is how a woman begins to cling without realizing it, not because you asked her to, not because you tried to be liked, but because you became the man who could walk away at any moment. Not out of spite, but because your mission won't wait for anyone who can't keep up. And if that truth feels cold, it's because you've been conditioned to believe that your emotional labor is required to deserve love. But the truth is the opposite. When you live as a man whose values are stronger than her expectations, she either levels up or exits, and either way, you win, because now your life is no longer defined by her comfort, but by your clarity. And once you understand how powerful it is to shift her world by shifting your own, the next step becomes obvious. Master the blueprint. That's why I created the Stoic Relationship Blueprint, a life-changing ebook for men who are tired of being lost in the chaos of modern relationships and ready to lead with unshakable clarity. It's not just a book, it's your quiet weapon. It's filled with timeless, practical Stoic principles that you can start applying today to transform your mindset, your relationships, and your entire life from the inside out. And now, it's available as an audiobook. You can absorb every powerful insight while walking, lifting, jogging, or just being in your zone. Because this isn't a book you read once, it's a guide you carry with you. It's always yours. You'll always have access to it. Whenever life throws confusion your way, you'll have something to anchor you back to the man you're becoming. The link is in the comments. Number 2. Be mysterious but grounded. A man who can't be figured out is a man she'll think about, because her mind isn't wired to let go of puzzles she hasn't solved. And yet most men make themselves so easy to read, so emotionally transparent, so desperate to be understood that they remove all mystery before she even asks a single question. And when you remove the mystery, you remove the intrigue. And once there's no intrigue, there's no emotional grip left, because she's already mapped out your every move before you even make it. And the reason this happens is because most men think connection means full exposure. They've been taught that vulnerability means sharing every thought, explaining every decision, making sure she never feels uncomfortable or unsure. And what they don't see is that comfort is not what creates desire. Comfort breeds complacency. It dulls emotion. It turns passion into routine. And what makes a woman obsessed? What makes her wonder? What makes her keep returning mentally even when she tries to move on? Is the man she couldn't quite place. the one who didn't give her every answer, the one who moved with clarity but without explanation, the one who listened more than he spoke and didn't offer his soul like a product for sale. And this isn't about playing games. It's about self-control. It's about discipline. It's about having a relationship with your own thoughts so strong that you don't need to voice them just to get attention. Because the man who speaks only when necessary, who doesn't share everything but everything he shares, carries weight. That man becomes heavy in her mind. He lingers, and his silence becomes an invitation to feel, not confusion, but tension, not avoidance, but depth. And this is where most men lose her interest. They mistake consistency for availability. They think showing up constantly means she'll appreciate them more, but all it does is lower your value in her subconscious because she begins to expect you, and what is expected is no longer exciting. What's always there becomes invisible. So when you ground yourself in stillness, in purpose, in quiet action, when your schedule reflects your discipline, not her mood, she feels something she doesn't feel with others. Uncertainty, and not the kind that triggers fear, but the kind that triggers curiosity. And curiosity is the soil where attraction grows. It makes her ask internal questions she's not used to asking, like, why doesn't he explain that? Why do I care so much about what he thinks? Why does his silence feel louder than another man's words? And in that space of curiosity, you build depth without even trying. You become the exception to every predictable conversation, every overshared emotion, every man who thinks access equals love. And this is where stoicism becomes your weapon, not coldness but calm, not detachment but restraint, not silence to manipulate but silence to observe, to decide if her energy even deserves your response. And in doing that, you shift the dynamic entirely, because now she's chasing your clarity, not because you withheld it, but because you don't throw it away for free. And that kind of emotional control makes her respect you in ways she can't articulate, because you represent something she's not used to. A man who doesn't place her approval above his direction, a man who doesn't lose himself trying to earn her interest, a man who listens not to comfort but to evaluate. And when she feels evaluated instead of consumed, she steps into a different emotional rhythm, one where your presence has consequence, where your words carry replay value, where your absence isn't empty, it's meaningful. And most men try to force meaning through constant reassurance, through over-explaining their intentions, through asking for understanding, not realizing that meaning is created through contrast, through pacing, through presence. And if you live your life so full of purpose that you don't need to constantly share it, that purpose becomes felt without needing to be explained. And in her world of constant access, of overshared stories, and men who use words like weapons and emotions like currency, you become a man who stands out by doing less, but every move is surgical, every word intentional, every action aligned, and that alignment is what creates trust. Not words, not affection, not compliments, but the way your energy stays centered regardless of her moods. And now you become the one she tells her friends about, not because you said something charming, but because she can't read you, she can't categorize you, and yet she feels safer with you than with anyone else who's always trying to be everything she needs. And that's the paradox. By not trying to be what she expects, you become what she values, not because you chased her attention, but because you controlled your own. And the more you master this, the more your life becomes untouchable, because now you're no longer living to please. You're living to lead, not just others but yourself. And in that leadership is where desire builds, not in fireworks, but in embers that never go out. Because now she associates you with stillness, with power that doesn't perform, with depth that doesn't explain. And when you become that man, you don't just attract, you shift her. You become the reference point, the one she compares others to, not because you tried harder, but because you did less with more meaning. And in a world of over-explaining, over-committing and over-sharing, you become rare. And what's rare is what remains. Number 3. Own your space. You don't need to say a word when your presence already shifts the air. And yet most men walk through life shrinking themselves to fit someone else's expectations. They lower their voice, they avoid eye contact, they move too fast, they speak too often, and every piece of that behavior tells the world one thing. They haven't claimed their space, and when a man hasn't claimed his space, nothing about him lingers, nothing about him sticks. He becomes invisible in plain sight because his energy is diluted by the need to be accepted. And what he doesn't understand is that every step he takes in reaction to others, every gesture that seeks approval, every anxious explanation, it weakens his presence until there's nothing left for anyone to feel. And if no one can feel you, no one can respect you, let alone be drawn to you. And the truth is, the most powerful men don't need to fill a room with noise. They fill it with weight. They don't announce themselves. They exist with such unshakable stillness that people notice before a word is spoken. And that's the kind of man who makes her nervous in the best way, not because he's intimidating, but because he's whole. And when a woman encounters a man who is whole, who doesn't flinch to hold eye contact, who doesn't apologize for his silence, who doesn't race to fill a moment just to avoid awkwardness, she feels something she rarely does. Presence, and in today's world where presence has been replaced with performance, you become rare the moment you stop trying to impress and instead begin to embody. Because embodiment doesn't require effort, it requires awareness, it requires slowing your movement, grounding your breath, aligning your speech with intention instead of impulse. And once you start living this way, you start to see how the smallest things command the greatest respect. The way you enter a room, the way you look at someone without trying to manage their response, the way you take your time with your words because you don't feel rushed to be understood. And that kind of power cannot be faked. It cannot be taught in words. It must be felt through practice. And the moment you begin to practice it, your world changes. You stop chasing outcomes. You start noticing how people respond to your calm instead of your performance, how they adjust their tone, how they start to lower their voice, how they slow down around you, not because you ask them to, but because your energy sets the rhythm. And when a woman enters that rhythm, she starts to lean in closer without knowing why. She starts to crave your presence without asking for more words. And this is where real attraction begins. Not in grand gestures, but in the subtle confidence of a man who is fully comfortable in his own presence, who walks into every situation not trying to control the room, but knowing he cannot be moved by it. And in relationships, this is even more crucial because most men think connection means constant activity. They think being emotionally available means over-communicating, and what they don't realize is that presence is not measured by how much you do, it's measured by how deeply you exist in every moment. And when you own your space, when your energy says I am here and I am enough, everything changes. She starts to respect you in ways she can't explain. She starts to feel grounded just by being near you. And this is not about being perfect or polished. It's about being solid. And solid doesn't mean you never feel doubt. It means doubt doesn't change how you move. And when you begin to master this, when you stop explaining your existence and start expressing your essence, the world makes room for you. Not because you asked, but because your energy leaves it no choice. Number 4, keep her guessing without games. When she knows what you'll do next, she stops feeling anything. Not because she doesn't care, but because humans are wired to disengage from anything they fully understand. And in the context of attraction, this is deadly, because once she maps your patterns, once she predicts your texts, your calls, your moods, your habits, she no longer feels stimulated by your presence. She feels numb, and what most men don't realize is that being predictable isn't safe. It's forgettable, and forgettable is the death of desire. But here's the part most won't tell you. This isn't about being chaotic. This isn't about playing games or pretending to be someone you're not. This is about owning your own emotional rhythm so fully that no one can predict how you'll respond unless they've mastered themselves first. And that alone forces her to grow just to stay in your orbit. And that's the gift you bring when you stop being predictable, not just keeping her guessing, but making her evolve, making her reflect, making her question her own patterns just to match your energy. And when she has to adjust, when she has to observe, when she doesn't get instant feedback or validation, her attention locks in, her thoughts circle back, because she's no longer in control of the rhythm. You are. And the truth is, most men are so afraid of being misunderstood, so desperate to avoid conflict, that they give away all their leverage for the sake of short-term comfort. They respond instantly to avoid tension. They overshare to seem trustworthy. They chase to feel valuable, and in doing so, they eliminate the one thing that creates emotional gravity, uncertainty, not confusion, but the subtle tension that arises when she can't predict you, when your silence isn't anger but alignment, when your actions don't match her assumptions but always reflect your standards. And that kind of unpredictability isn't a performance. It's the natural result of living with depth. Because when your life is led by vision, by internal values, by timing that respects your mission, you don't adjust yourself to her timeline, and that alone breaks her script, because now she can't use her usual playbook. Now she's not sure if her behavior is working. Now she has to engage with you, not through control, but through curiosity, and that is where real attraction begins. Not in desire, but in disruption. Not in availability, but in uncertainty. And the longer you stay committed to your own pace, the more power you gain. Because now you're not reacting. You're observing. Now you're not convincing. You're evaluating. And when a woman feels evaluated by a man who doesn't need her approval, she begins to behave differently, more carefully, more intentionally, because she knows her actions have consequences, not punishment, but presence. And this presence isn't fragile. It's not reactive. It's the kind of presence that forces her to think before she speaks, to reflect before she moves. And now the entire dynamic has changed. Now she's not just looking at you, she's looking inward. And that kind of emotional impact doesn't come from big speeches or dramatic moves. It comes from being a man who refuses to be fully seen until he chooses to be, who isn't afraid to be misunderstood in the short term, because he knows the long-term truth always reveals itself. And that truth is this: when you master your emotional timing, when you speak with precision and act with patience, when you don't hand over your rhythm to anyone's expectations, you become the man who doesn't just attract attention. You shift focus, you change the room, you make people question themselves, and in doing that, you don't just keep her guessing, you keep her growing. Number 5, let her chase. She doesn't value what she doesn't have to earn. And most men give themselves away too fast, too fully, too easily, because they've been convinced that love is something to be proven, that attention must be fought for, that validation is a reward for sacrifice, and in doing so, they strip themselves of all value, all tension, all mystery. They become the man who texts first every time, the man who adjusts his schedule for her last-minute whims, the man who apologizes for taking space. And none of these actions come from love. They come from fear, fear of being forgotten, of being replaced, of being alone. But what these men don't realize is that the moment you start chasing her validation, you hand her the blueprint for your control. She now knows what you're willing to do just to keep her interested. She knows how fast you respond, how quick you fold, how easy you forgive disrespect just to stay close. And from that moment on, the power dynamic is gone. Not because she's evil or manipulative, but because that's human nature. What comes too easy is always taken for granted. and this is the harsh truth that soft men refuse to accept. If she doesn't feel the possibility of losing you, she'll never truly value having you, and letting her chase is not about playing games. It's about positioning yourself as a man whose presence has to be earned, not assumed, and that starts with how you move, how you speak, how you respond. If you're always available, always accessible, always emotionally open without discretion, you teach her that you don't respect your own energy, and if you don't respect it, why should she? And the way to reverse this is not to fake distance or pretend to be busy. It's to genuinely build a life where you are too focused on your mission to drop everything for temporary attention, where your standards for connection are higher than your desire for affection, where your goals command more of your energy than any woman's emotional roller coaster. And when you operate this way, when you lead with direction and only allow what adds peace and focus to stay, you become the man she has to rise to meet, not the man who lowers himself to fit her moods. And that's when the dynamic flips. Not because you forced it, but because she sees what she's dealing with now. A man who doesn't flinch under pressure, who doesn't need to be liked to move forward, who doesn't hand out reassurance like it's candy to a child. And in this space, she starts to notice your absence differently. It's not just quiet. It's heavy. It's not punishment. It's reality. And now she begins to evaluate herself the way you once did. She replays her words, her tone, her actions, wondering what shifted, wondering why you don't engage the way you used to. And that mental space she now gives you is the same space she used to reserve for herself. And the irony is this: now she's the one chasing, not because you manipulated her, but because you finally chose yourself. And that is the real attraction, when your life is so full, so driven, so uncompromising, that she can't just walk in and take from it. She has to contribute, she has to align, she has to grow just to keep up. And that's what most men are afraid of doing, setting the bar high enough that she either meets it or leaves. But that's how you filter the noise. That's how you stop being an emotional punching bag for women who don't even know what they want. And this isn't about being cold or detached. It's about being selective. It's about saying, I am the prize not with words, but with how you live. And once you embrace this, once you stop needing her to pick you, you become undeniable. And when she finally realizes you're not waiting on her anymore, that her attention isn't your fuel, that your life has momentum with or without her, that's when she starts running toward you, not because you asked, but because she can't afford to lose a man who doesn't need her, but still chose to give her a chance. And that's when the chase becomes real. Number 6. Build a feeling she misses. Every man leaves an impression, but only a few leave a feeling she can't forget. And what most men don't understand is that it's not what you say, it's not how often you're there, it's how you make her feel when you're gone that determines your true impact. And the men who stay on her mind long after the messages stop, the ones she compares everyone else to, the ones she checks for silently without ever admitting it, those are the ones who created a contrast so powerful that her emotional system still responds to the thought of them even when they're nowhere to be found. And this isn't about being perfect or romantic. It's about building emotional contrast. It's about being the man who made her feel something no one else did, not through gifts or attention, but through presence, through the intensity of stillness, through the way you entered her life like an unshakable standard. And most men lose this because they give too much too soon. They overexpress, they overshare, they overstay. And in trying to be everything, they become nothing. But when you build a feeling that is rooted in contrast, when your presence means focus and clarity and your absence means reflection and silence, she starts to crave not what you gave, but how she felt in your space. And that craving turns into emotional attachment without needing physical proximity. And the reason this works is because the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. and the feeling she gets around you, that rare mix of peace and tension, safety and uncertainty, challenge and comfort, that becomes addictive. And the men who master this don't do it by pretending. They do it by being so grounded, so aligned, so rare in their self-control, that their energy speaks louder than any conversation ever could. And this feeling isn't built in one moment. It's built over time, in how you handle pressure, in how you manage space, in how you respond to disrespect, in how you prioritize your mission, because all of those decisions communicate something deeper than charm ever could. They communicate that you are a man who can't be moved by emotions alone, a man whose presence is felt before he speaks and missed after he's gone. And when she interacts with a man like that, it resets her standard. She starts to realize that her usual tactics don't work anymore, that emotional manipulation, passive aggression, subtle tests, they don't move you, and because they don't move you, she starts to move differently, and over time, the feeling she associates with you becomes something sacred, something rare, and even when she tries to find it elsewhere, she won't, because it wasn't the words, it wasn't the actions, it was the alignment, the way you lived in truth, even when it wasn't comfortable, the way you said no without guilt, the way you left when peace was no longer present, and that feeling becomes her new baseline, not because you forced it, but because you became it. And now every time she thinks of you, every time your name comes up, every time she scrolls past a man who doesn't measure up, she feels that contrast again, and it hurts in the best way, because now she knows what real feels like. And once a woman knows that, she can't go back to average, and this is the final shift most men never reach. Not being wanted for what you do, but being remembered for what you are. And once you reach that level, you don't need to chase, you don't need to perform. You just need to keep being who you are, because that alone is more powerful than any gesture you could ever make. They've kept you distracted, emotional, predictable, easy to control. Society doesn't want you grounded. They don't want you dangerous in your silence, sharp in your purpose, calm in your dominance. But the truth is no longer hidden. The Stoic Relationship Blueprint is now out, finally available in audiobook format, so you can feed your mind with timeless Stoic principles while walking, lifting, building. And every time life tests you, every time she pulls back, every time the world pushes you to fold, you'll remember who you are. The link is in the comments. Like this video, subscribe, and comment, "I'm reclaiming control," if you're ready to grab the book and finally take the wheel. Help more men find this truth before they waste another year begging for love that should be earned by self-respect.